Em setembro de 1943, Orwell demitiu-se da BBC, cansado, como ele disse, de desperdiçar os dinheiros públicos num trabalho diário que não produzia resultados. Em vez disso, concentrou-se a completar o seu novo livro, O Triunfo dos Porcos.
It took a while for all to find their feet.
A rebelião dos animais contra os seus donos humanos. Os porcos que emergiram como chefes revolucionários e a sua subsequente traição das outras criaturas da quinta que os apoiavam, tudo mimava o curso e o resultado da Revolução Russa. Numa época em que a Rússia era um forte aliado do Ocidente, o livro foi classificado de matéria demasiado sensível para publicação.
A minha leitura do manuscrito deu-me um considerável prazer e satisfação pessoal, mas vejo agora que ele possa ser considerado como algo muito pouco aconselhado para publicação neste momento. Se a fábula fosse dirigida aos ditadores e ditaduras em geral, a sua publicação estaria certa. Mas a fábula segue, vejo agora, tão de perto o progresso e desenvolvimento dos sovietes soviéticos e dos seus dois ditadores, que só se pode referir à Rússia, com exclusão de todas as outras ditaduras. Outra coisa, seria menos ofensivo se a casta dominante da fábula não fossem os porcos. Julgo que a escolha de porcos para a classe dominante ofenderá muita gente, particularmente os que forem sensíveis, como os russos são, sem dúvida. Resumindo, julgo melhor devolver-lhe o manuscrito do Triunfo dos Porcos e deixar o assunto na gaveta no que nos diz respeito. De uma carta do editor.
Depois de vários editores terem recusado o manuscrito, Orwell escreveu ao jovem Fred Warburg. Ao contrário dos outros, ele mostrou-se preparado para correr o risco.
Throughout his life, Orwell never liked being associated with anything that was too powerful or too successful. Well, I was clearly unsuccessful in those days. The list, no doubt, had a great deal of distinction, but it didn't have much else except that. It didn't have sales, for instance, not to any extent. And, of course, we were loathed by the communists, who hit our books hard all the time. So the fact that we were unsuccessful must have been a sort of qualifying category which suited Orwell very well.
Animal Farm starts off with a declaration for socialism by somebody ridiculously now called Old Major. It's a pity in a way he was called Old Major. The pig that starts the revolution is called Old Major, who's a mixture of sort of Marx and Lenin. But when you read what Old Major says at the beginning of Animal Farm, it's a description of that society that he wanted to get, that society based on equality. And that's overturned as a result of what happens later. Stalin and the others come and smash that up. So the point about Animal Farm is not just that it's against Russia, but that it's against the destruction of the ideal of socialism.
First of all, Animal Farm is a masterpiece. I mean, that's a really beautiful piece of writing, which will, be like Gulliver's Travels. It'll always be of interest. And it shows such an amazing perceptiveness of this growing movement towards totalitarianism. Not towards communism, but towards totalitarianism.
12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which.
A 29 de março de 1945, enquanto Orwell relatava a libertação da França para o Observer, recebeu a notícia de que Aileen morrera numa operação aparentemente de rotina em Newcastle. Levou o filho adotivo de 1 ano, Richard, para viver em Londres, procurando em vão uma nova mãe para a criança. Vivendo com uma ama no 6º andar de um prédio decadente, a família poucas pessoas via e os contactos sociais de Orwell resumiam-se numa única saída por semana para jantar com amigos literários.
He was an interesting man to be with. I mean, he was very rigid about the routine of his domestic life. He wanted or expected things to be done absolutely at a time. But he was a nice man to work for, but not easy.
I remember during the war, near the end of the war, going out to one of our weekly lunches when he said to me how much he hated London and how much he'd like to get out of it. But he said, of course, you can't get out. You can't leave when people are being bombed to bits all around you. He didn't say this in the least heroically. I would have been most happy to get out if I could have done. His behaviour was sometimes absurd in what I found an endearing way. Like at our lunches, there would always be on the menu perhaps some really quite good bit of food, like, say, liver and bacon. Orwell would never have that. What he would go for would be, as again you might say, and I think this is really true, the victory pie, which was practically uneatable, and he would eat it quite zestfully and say with, in a rather happy way, you won't get anything better than this nowadays. So this image of his being somebody who liked discomfort, yes, there was something in that.
No verão de 1947, Orwell mudou-se com Richard para a árida ilha de Jura, ao largo da costa ocidental da Escócia.
He arrived in April 47. And I remember very vividly him coming in and how ill and terribly ill he looked, and terribly drawn and sad face he had.
Aqui acabou 1984, um ataque contundente ao totalitarismo. O mundo de instituições, propaganda e controle mais difusos apresentado no livro não é, como muitos pensaram inicialmente, uma previsão do futuro nem um retrato crítico da União Soviética, mas antes uma descrição exagerada para a ocasião do mundo que rodeava Orwell em 48. A arquitetura da emissora da BBC, onde Orwell trabalhara, é reproduzida no sinistro Ministério da Verdade. Os pormenores da sua própria casa são os da casa de Winston Smith.
A good deal of the setting of the book reflects the life that we were living in 1948, the life of shortages, of rationing. There are references, for example, to clothing coupons. The Labour government had, for example, there was a poster saying, "We work or want." He didn't care for that kind of sanctimonious tone or the slide rule planning. At that time, Orwell and Arthur Koestler were the only two imaginative writers in England who really understood totalitarianism. And I think that's true. And I think in both cases it's because there was a streak of totalitarianism in themselves. There was something both very friendly about Orwell when you met him, but also something very remote. He was a kind of permanent outsider. And he did hold views about the way in which people behaved, which could at times be very harsh indeed. He said to me once, and it was a kind of joke, and it certainly sounds like a joke, of course, we're all either sadists or masochists, and I'm a sadist.
I was the first man in Europe, I should think, to read it. It made a tremendous impression on me. I thought it was an awe-inspiring book, a horrifying book, as it is. And it came out 6 months before he died. It was a sensation, more in Europe than in England. It was very much a seller in England, but in Europe it was a political act of enormous importance. Because you must remember that after the war, Russia, which had done so much to win it, was enormously powerful and in some ways admired. And this was, like Animal Farm, but in a different way, the most powerful anti-Soviet communism tract that you could find anywhere.
I think why he'll survive is because his language is so beautifully clear. He talked about prose like a window pane, looking through a window so that you can see exactly what's on the other side of the window. That people who write, he hated obfuscatory language, you know, people who write drivel, who confuse people because they want to be clever. You know, academics write, I believe they write, because they don't understand the problem, they write to confuse other people so that other people won't understand what they're writing about. Things are not that difficult to understand. And the ability to write clearly was his greatest asset. And I think that's why he survives and goes on surviving. I mean, people will go on reading him. He was great popular in the Cold War, the Americans promoted him and so on. But I think, you know, now that that's all died down, there isn't a Cold War, I think he'll survive beyond that, and he'll survive as a better, you know, more akin to what he really meant. He'll survive because his ideas are so inspiring and he writes so clearly.
A 13 de outubro de 1949, Orwell casou com Sonia Brownwell, que juntamente com vários amigos literários o acompanhou nos seus últimos 3 meses de vida. A 21 de janeiro de 1950, apenas com 46 anos, Orwell morreu num hospital de hemorragia pulmonar.
He asked for no memorial service, but he asked that he should be buried, if possible, in a Church of England churchyard. That certainly was quite contradictory with his known beliefs, which were that he didn't have any religious beliefs, but he had this, what you might call sentimental attachment to traditional, habitual things.
I think that was the reversion to his picture of England. It was this tremendous dream that he had of this happy England, of nice open-faced people and sort of beautiful red pillar boxes and countrymen. It was a dream, and a part of that dream was the country churchyard. It was being sort of finishing up where he wanted to be, which is in what he thought was the sort of heart of England, the countryside. But of course, the funny thing about it was one always has this kind of irony built into everything in life. When it came to the point, it was very difficult to get him into a country churchyard. I hadn't realized that till then, that you have to have some, either live there or have some particular basis for getting in. And in the end, he only got into a country churchyard through the influence of the Astors. So that the thing that he most abominated, in a sense, the sort of millionaires, were needed.
I think I'd have to say I loved him. I really did. I thought he was the most lovable person, extremely likable, somebody who never failed you, who never disappointed you. He was very considerate, too. He was not at all a sort of selfish, self-centered person. You didn't feel he was living in his own little world. He was a really good friend.
Mais uma vez perguntou a si próprio para quem escrevia ele aquele diário. Para o futuro, para o passado, para uma era que podia ser imaginária? Ele era um fantasma solitário, proferindo uma verdade que nunca ninguém ouviria. Mas enquanto ele a proferisse, por qualquer forma obscura, a continuidade não se quebraria. Não era fazendo-se ouvir, mas sim mantendo a sanidade que se prosseguia a herança humana. Voltou à mesa, molhou a caneta e escreveu: para o futuro ou para o passado? Para um tempo em que o pensamento seja livre, em que os homens sejam diferentes uns dos outros e não vivam sozinhos. Para um tempo em que a verdade exista e o que for feito não possa ser desfeito. Da era da uniformização, da era da solidão, da era do Big Brother, da era do pensamento dúbio. Saudações. De 1984. Escrito em 1949.